Honorable Abul Kalam Azad to give us his welcome speech. Thank you.
So, dear audience and friends on the dais, this morning we are going to discuss on finance. Especially the topic is power and energy, funding the way to sustainable growth. You know all, sustainable growth is that growth which meets the need of future or need of present, keeping in mind the necessity of future. Unfortunately, at present, the whole globe consumes 20% more than it produces. You may think this is impossible proposition. Yes, this is an impossible proposition. We are consuming more than we produce. So, what we are consuming extra, this is supposed to be consumed by my son or by my grandson. Keeping this in mind, we need to conserve energy, we need to reduce consumption of energy. Keeping this in back of mind, again, we need to generate electricity, more energy in Bangladesh. It is a developing country, growing very fast. The last year, only 1 year ago, our GDP was 6 plus. But from last year, it crossed 7. Yesterday, our planning minister, he forecast that this year we will cross 8%. And he estimated 8.25. Obviously, growth is always related with energy. Keeping that in mind, we need to have 40 gigawatt by 2030 and 60 gigawatt by 2041. All you know, each megawatt requires almost 1 million, or if we keep it in mind the competitive global market, maybe 0.8 million, but along with transmission and distribution, it is more than 1.5 million. So 40 gigawatt means $60 billion. All we know, for achieving the SDG, the globe requires $2 to $3 trillion each year. Bangladesh requires $928 billion in next 12 years. So $64 billion per year on average. In this session, we will be discussing how we get these resources. What are the innovative ways of getting this investment? I want to stop here. We have a very good panel here. You see a very rich panel along with the keynote presenter. We have 6 speakers. So the keynote speaker, Richard Races, he is the managing director. At present, he is head of gas to power Siemens, and he holds different position in Siemens. We will be enlightened with his presentation, followed by discussion from the panel. And also, the audience, you are also welcome to participate with your comments, views, and questions. So I would request first Richard to make his presentation, keynote presentation by Richard. We can give a big hand to him.
Thank you for the introduction. Chief Coordinator Azad, Minister Hamid, Power Secretary Kaikels, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Richard Reisig. I work for Siemens. I promise to keep my remarks brief because the panel is extremely impressive. So hopefully this will spark some conversation and look forward to my fellow panelists' comments. What I thought, we can see this here. Very good. So the topic of funding the way to the future, I think it was laid out very well. Traditionally, in the markets like the United States and Europe, there was a very defined process of how power was brought forward. Essentially, you had a very defined process. It was planning, proposal, a bid, and then ultimately we build a power plant and operation. I think you can see from this that this was driven by technology and engineering firms, and it was dependent upon liquidity in a particular market, currency availability, and it placed a lot of the balance sheet risk of these things onto the government itself. And the question going forward, and one that we have oftentimes even within Siemens, is whether this model that's been used for the last 30 years is the same model that will be used for the emerging markets. And we would suggest at Siemens, potentially not. If you look at some of the shifts that are happening in electrification, you can see that clearly the Asian and African economies will account for 50% of the growth by 2040. This is a substantial change by these economies. And the underlying premise of this is where the power is going. It's not going to those established markets like the United States and Europe, but in fact, it's heading to economies such as Bangladesh. Migration, as you see, the installed capacity means significant new capital and liquidity requirements. As mentioned before, it's quite some staggering numbers. Certainly the intensity and approach to the funding infrastructure puts on capital budgets with all the infrastructure needs of a country like Bangladesh. And essentially the projects in emerging markets often face bankability by investors, the actors that'll be there. So power infrastructure projects as a takeaway potentially require a different model to go forward. What's also happening is, and I think everybody's quite aware of this, is the fluctuation in gas markets. As you can see, electricity will still be the balance of where LNG is headed. The substantial growth here by models of IHS would suggest that electricity will account for most of LNG consumption and supply. The chart on the right actually shows the global demand for LNG. You can see the number of FIDs that are announced with all the prolific LNG in the world surely outstrip the amount of demand that you'll see in the market. So, strong demand by growth will still be outstripped by mid-2020s, and it's a buyer's market, our view. I'm sure Chevron will have some opinions on this as well. In addition to that, what's happening in the LNG market? You look at the middle bar in the year 2013, you had long-term contracts of up to 25 years. You can see the changing dynamics in the LNG market show you now that has almost shrunk by almost 50%. Less than 30% of the contracts in LNG now are long-term, which would indicate that something has to be done, both in the business model for how traditional OEMs like my company go about the market, and certainly how LNG suppliers and oil and gas companies look at the market. So higher liquefaction liabilities are exacerbated by more challenging LNG economics, the CapEx underlying liquefaction liabilities, and the aggregators and producers are no longer getting 25-year supply contracts. This would suggest the potentially changing model. And also what we define as a strategic investor. Power and gas markets are becoming similar in terms of integrated project development to promote demand. If we look at the share of who's going to develop these projects, it's most likely going to be the strategic investors that see the demand as the way forward. Fuel suppliers, local developers, and OEM and service companies. This structure you can see below accounts for a number of different models, but essentially a project SPC, where the governments will look as a power off-taker, as a sovereign guarantee for those electrons, and the private sector will have to look forward to how to put these pieces together and make it bankable. Essentially, strategic investors will manage the balance sheet risk until the debt financial close, and then hold equity exposure. Project SPCs, structure transfers debt risk from sovereign entities to projects, may also take the fuel supply risk, and essentially the various related party contracts between project SPCs and the strategic investors provide incentive and risk for the development exposure. This is not a one-size-fits-all model, but certainly is one in which we can fund a way to the future for development. Who are these strategic investors is also important. If you look at the gas to power value chain as seen above, you have the various entities that play across this value chain, and that's what we would define as strategic investors. Both IOCs, OEMs, certain developers. That will make up what we believe will take the private sector forward in markets like Bangladesh. And finally, the lenders, who will ultimately play a big part in this. Multilateral development banks, ECA banks, political risk insurance, certainly lead arrangers, OEMs, capital markets, long-term B. Obviously, with lenders in non-recourse finance, it becomes a suggestion or other considerations in the financing of a deal. As you can see here, multilaterals and ECA participations have to work together. We might have increased contingency reserves. Recourse financing always has its challenges in terms of lockup periods for sponsors, development banks, subordination of related party contracts, all the things that are brought upon with non-recourse finance. It would suggest that this is all due and very possible. As a result, Siemens has entered this market with our first integrated gas-to-power project in Brazil, in which case we have a strategic group of sponsors that include both us as Siemens as an investor, as the EPC contractor, the O&M, British Petroleum as the gas supplier and equity investor, and a strategic developer, Prumo, owned by a hedge fund, EIG, who owns the port. We believe this is a particular model we can use forward in markets like this, where we have a world leader in H-class technology, dedicated state-of-the-art FSRU, 2 combined cycle power plants equating to 3 gigawatts under development, a flexible assured 20-year LNG supply contract, an expedited path to financial close that includes IFC, and then, as you can see, all of the pieces that maximize the growth of Brazil's economy. We believe this is a particular model that we can use. Again, maybe not everywhere, but certainly as one way to fund the future development for power, and certainly look forward to the comments by the panel. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Richard, for the very interesting introduction to the discussion. I would start with the first question to Mr. Chairman. Yes, maybe. You mentioned that Bangladesh is ahead of a significant journey, coming from current 16 gigawatts of capacity to roughly 40 by 2030 and 60 by 2041. Requiring obviously significant investments. Richard showed some of the potential setups which are working in other countries. My first question would be, what would be your view on the way of cooperation and specific roles in between state-owned utilities of Bangladesh, financing sector, global private producers and suppliers?
Thank you very much. The presentation, this shows small is beautiful. Very brief presentation, covered so many things. About the financing in Bangladesh, all in generation, transmission, and distribution. The boundary which I drawn, that 40 gigawatt and 60 gigawatt, along with the energy efficiency and all this. We know the global partners, especially the multilateral banks, World Bank or ADB, newly formed Asian Investment Infrastructure. But resources are always limited. As I was telling, for the sustainable development, the whole globe requires $2 to $3 trillion each year. So every country needs extra money. We are not going to get extra money from some other's pocket. But we need to create opportunity so that the different organizations, they find much more opportunity in investing in Bangladesh. So take the case of World Bank ADB. Maybe their participation is not going to increase further. But with the new banks, obviously there are opportunities. The bilateral cooperations, I understand we have much more scope there. And also, so many organizations may come up with joint venture proposal. This increases FDI, and the foreign investors, they get much more comfort, confidence when they get one of the local organization with them. Power sector, they started working on investment with bidders finance. All we know, in the globe, there is a question always that whether we have the transparency. In last 10 years, Bangladesh working on increase of power production very hugely, but no hue and cry, no question raised about the transparency. So, bidders finance could be another option, another opportunity. If we look into all the options, my idea with the development partners, especially the big companies, you have an opportunity here. In Bangladesh, power sector never failed in paying dues to the private sector. At present, the market share of private sector is 45%. Just this week, Honorable Prime Minister guided Power Division and both Energy Division. You can raise up to 50%, and it can be more also. Maybe with today's discussion, investors, they will feel much more comfort in especially joint ventures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe then a question to the other side, yes, to the investor suppliers. So Richard, Wendy, Neil, Kim Yong, Girish, how would you see your contribution to this really ambitious growth? How you can contribute to support Bangladesh in this journey? Maybe Wendy, you can start.
All right. Thank you very much, Ferdinand and Mr. Aziz. So I think that we do have quite a big challenge ahead of us, for sure, here in Bangladesh, but I think we see that as a major opportunity. The International Finance Corporation is the private sector part of the World Bank Group, and the Honorable SDG Coordinator is correct. World Bank resources to the government are limited. Now, IFC resources are not unlimited, but they are a far greater capacity for financing here in Bangladesh. The IFC has, over the last 5 years, financed about $800 million in the power and energy space in Bangladesh. That's constituted about 15% of the power generation in the country, around 2,300 megawatts. We've also looked at some of the firsts in really expanding our own, footprint on that power and energy value chain that Richard highlighted. Last year, we were part of the financing and equity in the first LNG terminal in Moshkali, and that, I think, was a turning point for Bangladesh, one of the turning points that we see globally in Asia as well. So we were very proud to be part of that new initiative in LNG. Just last year, we also have expanded to doing financing with LPG, which is an important part of the energy equation here in Bangladesh. And I think that's been also a very wise part of how the government has discussed both power generation, but also access to other energy services and energy efficiency in the range of space. I do want to highlight that we are quite fortunate to work with extremely strong and forward-looking strategic domestic developers. 3 of our clients are sponsors here today, and we have been very fortunate also to be able to bring in international developers into Bangladesh. But one of the things that, one of the issues that we see going forward is the amount of financing that's long-term. So how do you make sure that the developers, high-quality developers, and also lenders are able to provide that kind of long-term financing and become comfortable with Bangladesh. We provide some of the longest-term financing available in Bangladesh for these sorts of private power and private infrastructure projects. And we also look to mobilize other investors. So actually, our bottom line, if we're successful over the next 5 to 10 years, our share of the financing will decrease, and we'll be bringing in more other financiers. So that's really where IFC aims to increase what we can do here in Bangladesh, and we're aiming to be doing more in the space of at least probably doubling or tripling what we can do in the infrastructure space broadly over the next 5 years. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Neil, maybe you continue.
Sure. Thank you, Ferdinand. So I think maybe I'd start by talking to our current role in the energy value chain here in Bangladesh, because I think I can offer some historical context that might be useful as we look to the future. So as a company, we've been here, Chevron came to Bangladesh in 2005, but through legacy entities, we've been here for over 20 years. And in that time, we've really grown our gas production, so our primary focus is in the gas supply to the energy system. We currently provide over 50% of the country's gas production and over 80% of the country's condensate production. And so I think that speaks to a number of the elements that are here in Bangladesh that have enabled the growth. So in the last decade, we have more than trebled our gas production here. And I think the chairman, Mr. Azad, referenced the partnership as being an important element, and that's certainly something we've found in our time here as being very strong. And I think the good stability in terms of fiscal terms, contract sanctity, clarity of regulatory framework has all been an enabler for that, and will continue to be an important foundation. I think looking forward in terms of further investments, I won't comment on specific opportunities, but I think we continue to work very closely with the government of Bangladesh to understand how we can continue to supply that gas that's fundamental to the power chain here.
Thanks. Mohammed Aziz Khan, similarly to Chevron, Summit has also got a significant stake already in the country. Maybe, not everyone is aware, just a short intro of that, and maybe also the same question, how do you see your future role in this significant ambition?
Thank you very much. I'm very delighted to be here, and congratulations to the MPMR for holding this excellent week on electricity and energy. Thank you, sir, for enabling me to be seated beside you. Summit has invested about $1.5 billion in electricity generation and to some extent now also in LNG. The challenge in my personal view, so that we can start discussing the crucial point, as Mr. Azad has rightly pointed out, that investment of $60 billion is necessary for 40 gigawatts. But for 40 gigawatts, we also required about 40 million tons of LNG equivalent to be imported into Bangladesh to generate electricity. And that's a lot of input that there is a paradigm shift happening at this point in Bangladesh, where from a net zero import of energy, while we were importing diesel and a little bit of petroleum and HFO, but mostly it was our own indigenous gas. Today, the huge shift has taken place where we are required to import LNG, we would be required to import coal, and this is the challenge. Every investor, every lender, IFC has substantially supported us, both in terms of equity and lending, including the Bibiana has been financed $210 million at a very low cost. What Bangladesh requires is low cost, long tenor financing for this 40 gigawatt. What Bangladesh requires is to express how we will be able to import input for this 40 gigawatt of electricity. And that seemed to me to be the main challenge. Any investor or any lender for that matter primarily sees risk, and compared to that risk, the reward. As also mentioned by the Siemens person, that the balance sheet risk, which inter alia is whether the lender or the investor will get paid. So we are really talking about a new 10 years forward or new 12 years forward, rather than the last 10 years where we have grown under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister, very progressive, very fast at decision making, Mr. Azad as the implementer of those policies in the initial stage and subsequently as well. We have done an excellent job. In the next 10 years, we see it, as I mentioned, a paradigm shift. We are becoming an importing country. The people of Bangladesh must realize it. We as investors must realize it. And to me, the key to success would be efficient use, as the Honorable Prime Minister was yesterday saying, that, of course, at the back of this, I don't want to sound negative, we are starting this next 10 years on the back of last 10 years journey, where the Bangladesh has created a reserve of $31 billion. Bangladesh has huge macroeconomic successes. Bangladesh is currently producing 17,000 megawatts of electricity. Bangladesh productivity, GDP has moved to $270 billion. And therefore we have a huge, how should I say, a place to jump from to the next 10 years. But the challenge of the next 10 years is also import of the input for generation of electricity. And we must be very efficient in the purchase of these inputs, how we purchase the LNG, how we purchase the coal. Countries all over the world in the past have moved on and acquired mining, acquired LNG, natural gas fields, has invested in liquefaction, has invested in transportation to get a niche, to get a lower price, to get a permanent supply, secure the supply of. Countries have gone into wars. From 1945, most of the wars have been fought on ensuring energy supply. So those are the key challenges that comes up in front of us. And I'm sure the distinguished panel will discuss about this as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bangladesh is clearly getting more and more dependent on exports, yes, among others, gas. Kim, maybe you can give a perspective on that. How do you see your role in that one?
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Perhaps a little bit of a background on our company and what we're doing and our aspirations in Bangladesh. SK Gas is is one of the large conglomerates from Korea, and we are currently investing on the LPG fully refrigerated world-scale terminal in the Matabari region. And we see that as our investment in the infrastructure as phase one, the first phase of our investment. And once we do that, phase two would be further investing down the value chain in the petrochemical area as well as in the power area. Now, we haven't been directly involved in a power project yet, but drawing from our experience from South Korea, we also have similar challenging task to put another additional 30 to 40 gigawatts in the future. And I would like to applaud the Bangladesh government for being very prudent and also forward-looking in terms of your power mix. Because South Korea has traditionally been relying on nuclear and coal, still comprises over 75% of our power mix. So the challenges of putting another 30, 40 gigawatts in the next couple of years, primarily by gas, puts a lot of pressure both for the government and also the private sector. One thing we have to explain is that our power market or industry in Korea is based on merit order. So depending on the efficiency of the power plant, we are awarded our generation capacity. So both on the public side and the private side, we have to be very conscientious about how we become competitive. And there are four areas or factors or drivers that drive the economics, as you know. The first one is infrastructure, of course. And as you know, having world-scale infrastructure is very important. We understand that depending on the type of infrastructure you have, say from example, a receiving terminal of LNG, the cost of supply, the logistics can vary anything from $0.5 MMBTU to $1. So having world-scale infrastructure is very important to achieving that efficiency. Secondly is the fuel efficiency. It sounds very ironic, but the more you buy, the more expensive it becomes because of different. The more demand you have, your requirements are harder. So you have to be very smart in buying the right fuel. So KOGAS, as an example, which is probably the second largest buyer of gas globally, is not the cheapest buyer in the world, despite the fact that they're buying 35 million tons a year. So having a sound fuel strategy is very important. And thirdly is being able to diversify the fuel and be able to optimize the fuel that you're buying. One example, in Korea in the last 3 years, the receiving cost of LPG and LNG, the advantages have been half and half. So half the time LNG was cheaper and half the time LPG was cheaper. So you have to be able to optimize around those opportunities. And one of the projects that we are currently developing is a 1.2 gigawatt power plant in Korea, which will be the first world-scale or large-scale LNG and LPG dual power plant, which we hope to be able to optimize around those fuel efficiencies. So having said that, infrastructure, having a diversity in the fuel sources, mixes, and capturing the optimization opportunities, which is largely also being facilitated by the recent technologies by companies like Siemens and GE, is something that every power company and the government needs to think about to make sustainable growth possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Girish, you coming from a different technology, obviously would be very much interested in your perspective.
Thank you, Ferdinand. I'd like to say that I find Bangladesh an extremely exciting market. What excites me about this market is the growth opportunities. There's so much of growth the country is planning for. And I come from a renewables background, and I've been in renewables for many years now. And I see there's a huge opportunity for renewables to have a significant share in the country. Initially, maybe about 5 or 6 years back, people said that there could be about 15-20% renewables that a grid could possibly handle. But today, the technologies have evolved. There are new technologies that have come. There's a lot of research that's happening and a push towards making the grid as a 100% renewable grid. So while this might be a little time away, I think there is an opportunity to get started somewhere. So Bangladesh is already making the right moves in terms of encouraging the renewable power mix, in terms of coming up with the right policy, the right incentives. So I think this is the direction in which the country is going in terms of the growth, in terms of the right policy, a very professional approach. And companies like mine who are into renewables, I think can make a significant contribution to the market. And the country can continue to evolve with the new technologies and absorb a lot more renewables into the grid. Thank you.
Thank you. Mamoun, you're working with many of the stakeholders, many of the participants around financing, project structuring, etc. What do you see the main issues, and also what are the main benefits, here, in order that they can efficiently contribute to this ambitious growth agenda?
Yes, I've been associated with most of the, incidentally though, most of the power projects here in Bangladesh, starting from our energy projects, starting from KAFCO to Summit, United, Khulna Power, NAPC Power Consortium, and more importantly, AES, Meghnaghat and Haripur. So what my learning is that, or my piece of takeaway would be that it started with this PPA, Power Purchase Agreement. That was the real kickstarter. And second big thing was formation of ITCOL, Infrastructure Development Company. These two things have significantly contributed towards what we get to see, the power kind of quasi-regulation happening in Bangladesh. And of course, while we were implementing the AES Meghnaghat and Haripur, all of a sudden the political risk insurance came into play. And so we first and foremost encountered this political risk insurance. And afterwards, of course, this power tariff, this became a major issue. And mostly, so far, you are seeing these power plants or power companies playing their game. Mostly, these are being supported by ECS. So, export credit agencies, be it KfW or Hermes or Sachi or ECGD, or even for India-Bangladesh Friendship Power Plant, India Exim, played a significant role. So, in the interim. And then, because these power plants payback period is 10 years, 12 years, 16 years. So as Wendy was mentioning that yes, finding a right or matching yield curve is very tough. And here Bangladesh is a country where, because most of the term deposit is 1 or 3 years kind of tenor. So and long-term term deposit is not encouraged, or even from the government side of it. So there is no tax break for putting up money for long-term term deposit. So that makes our life much tougher. So far we are seeing these power plants are mostly being supported by either ECS or or bilateral kind of funding from World Bank or the IFC as such as of now. Also some of the banks that I have worked with like Citibank or Standard Chartered Bank, they have come up with offshore financing, and there also the PPA, power tariff and sponsors integrity, sponsors credential played a significant role. So far Bangladesh Power is concerned, we have not seen much of local banks financing those power projects because it is very tough to put up a befitting yield curve to support a payback period of 10 plus years in the power thing.
Thank you. Honorable
I
Principal
want
Coordinator.
to share some views. You see, in Bangladesh, as my colleagues on the dais, they shared that we have a very good structure, framework of regulations in terms of power purchase agreement, the Energy Regulatory Commission, keeping discipline in power and energy sector, maintaining the good price, handling the disputes amongst the parties, government, private sector, investors. In Bangladesh, so many good practices has been done in last 10 years. Supporting the investors, supporting the private sectors in Bangladesh. Normally, in this region of the globe, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all these, the bureaucrats, they are much more resistive. They love to tell no. But in Bangladesh, the bureaucracy, they turn from no to yes. And maybe the private sectors will bear me out. How much support do they get from the government, especially the government officials? So this is a teamwork. Not only power sector, not only energy. You look into the National Board of Revenue, Law Ministry, Land Ministry. So all the related ministries, the government machineries, they work together for the encouragement of much more investment. From last 4 years, in government sector, another good practice has been started, that is annual performance agreement. Each of the ministry, they signs an agreement with the cabinet division, that is, each of the minister signs an agreement with the prime minister, what his ministry will deliver in the next year. And this commitment shows much more improvement in investment sector also. The vibrant power sector and also the vibrant government. One of the major cause for this is in power sector there is a special law so that the power and energy secretary, they can procure anything, anytime if they feel it is necessary. The method, this can be set up by the concerned ministry. Especially this is for the power and energy sector. This gives much more freedom, much more innovation for improving these two sectors. For improving the efficiency of the officials, you see 60 hours training per year for each of the employee in the government is mandatory now. And what happens, yesterday Honorable Prime Minister told that we are running now 127 power plants. So almost all these power plants are being run by our local people. Only a few experts are working with this. This shows the capacity development in Bangladesh. So we are doing long-term plan and also about the renewables. Maybe in Bangladesh, a land-hungry country, but our neighboring countries, they have much more opportunity in renewables in terms of hydro, in terms of solar. Maybe the last BIMSTEC, as it was decided to have a renewable energy grid or solar grid. So we can share production in India, production northern India, in Bangladesh also. Rather, not encouraging much more solar power plant in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, the work which has been done to support or to fuel this economic growth, already what you have seen in the past few years is impressive. Yes, so I mean, there are few countries growing at this speed at a time when actually part of the country is still not electrified. So to keep up pace with that and to fuel that growth is really impressive. Going forward, Bangladesh would, however, need to rely on marginally more and more expensive resources, right? And of course, I mean, the balance is changing. We see gas more increasing than anything else, coal being under pressure, renewables cost-wise significantly dropping, but still very high. Nuke, one of the most expensive one. Obviously, if you need quickly large scale, I mean, maybe there are some other choices as well. I would be interested in the view of the panelists. What would be their advice to the government of Bangladesh in terms of the future energy mix? To bear in mind not only the sustainability, but also affordability of the growth, considering the changing price dynamics among different fuel sources. And maybe we take it, you know, in the order. Richard, do you want to take it?
Hello, thank you. It's a good question. And in fact, it's probably one of the reasons why Siemens still maintains a wind business, solar business, gas-powered power plant business, steam business for coal. I think ultimately the conventional wisdom is an energy mix is the best way forward. And in terms of the goals of that energy sector, dependent upon industrial development or manufacturing development, that also should play into account. So I personally subscribe to the energy mix. Certainly natural gas at this point in time is, as I showed before, prolific in terms of the amount of LNG, and it's certainly opened up a number of markets to gas-fired generation that 10 years ago wasn't thought possible. So that does cause the opportunity for that energy mix as well. And I think at this particular time, as we described, gas-fired generation delivers a number of benefits in addition to pairing with renewables. So certainly that would be, in our view, part of the energy mix here as well in the next 10 years.
So sitting on this panel, I can't help but notice we have representation from different segments. And I'm sure each segment could make a strong case as to how their share can be substantially used in the energy mix. So what it goes to show is it's possible. You know, you could have an energy mix that uses pretty much predominantly gas, or an energy mix that uses LNG or coal or renewable as well. In terms of the sustainability, in terms of the pricing as well, renewables today is already at a stage where it's more than able to stand on its own 2 feet and compete with any segment that it wishes to. There are a few things that the government can continue to do, and I think it's already on the right track, to support and improve the pricing of the renewables. A lot of the things that are already happening, sir, as you mentioned, is a strong regulatory framework and a clear outlook. I think as investors, we would like to see there is a long-term commitment for the government in terms of the policy outlook for the renewable energies. And a stable outlook really attracts a lot of investors, and when there are more investors, that also improves the method of doing things and starts to improve the pricing. It is perhaps not something that will be achieved immediately. For instance, if you look at the way the progress has happened around the world, renewables always started a little bit on the expensive side. But in each of the countries, the prices have come down as the market has matured and worked towards fostering the growth of this. Further strengthening of the grid is also very useful because then we can inject a lot more different varieties of power. And a certainty in terms of the annual increase in project availability will also help greatly. Thank you.
So I'm aligned with Richard's comments. I think given the aggressive demand trajectory that's forecast for Bangladesh, I think to treble again by 2030 on the electricity side, I think it's going to take a mix. I think technology will continue to play a key role. I think right now natural gas forms the lion's share of electricity supply. And we heard yesterday about the active plans the government has to better characterize the remaining gas resource in the country, both through the onshore exploration program that BAPEX is pursuing and also through the multi-client seismic offshore to characterize that resource. So I think that'll continue to be an important part. And as I say, I think technological evolution will help maintain the cost effectiveness of that as a supply. As an example, if you look at the United States, I think everyone's familiar with the tight oil and gas supply over there that's really revolutionized that energy supply to the point where tight oil is now about half of the total in the US and tight gas is now about 2/3 of the total. So I think we'll continue to see those innovations. On the LNG side, as we've talked about, clearly Bangladesh is well on its journey there with the FSRU, already active and more planned there. And I think that's true on a global scale. We see that as very much an expanding market. I think the forecasts are from now to 2025 that we're going to see a 50% growth in LNG demand. And certainly at Chevron, we view that as a positive thing. We're a big player in that market of LNG supply, and we're always looking for high-quality customers. And I think Girish talked about the renewables. I know there's a near-term target out there to achieve 10% through renewables, and we heard yesterday about the strong progress the government's making on the solar side of things. So again, I think it'll take a mix, and I from what I see, the government is pursuing all of those avenues.
Thank you. This is a challenging one to do in this line, but I'm glad I'm in the middle of the line. So I would agree with a lot of the things that my colleagues just mentioned. I guess to boil it down to a few additional points, I mean, clearly the focus on generation, expanding generation, and doing it in a proper mix of fuels and technologies is going to be important. It's a portfolio risk management approach. So, but large generation projects that do bring in some of the highest quality technologies on efficiency and the best developers, I think continues to be a high priority for Bangladesh. And clearly for the government. In addition to that, I think some of the areas that have already started, I would give a lot of credit to the Prime Minister herself and Mr. Azad and the Power and Energy Ministry and the State Minister. They really have scoped critical areas that need attention. One of them being, of course, transmission and distribution. There is going to be also a significant share of investment needed in that transmission and distribution space. So making sure that the dispatch systems, ancillary services systems, and the overall efficiency of that grid is making significant improvements alongside generation will be important. And mobilizing the same excellent private sector resources that have been used in generation into transmission and distribution, I think, is one of the emerging areas for Bangladesh. So looking at independent power transmission, for instance, could be a way to make sure that that grid expands at the rate we need. And then finally, I would say that there are, of course, excellent examples in the space of renewables. So from IFC's side, we very much would like to be seeing renewables and supporting renewables in Bangladesh. And I agree with Girish that the technology now is improving. And we can also see that models around either wind parks, solar parks, that sort of concession approach has worked in other markets to remove some of the regulatory barriers, but even some of the barriers around land and availability and interconnections. So just removing the risks of new technologies, the government's policy can really help open up that sector as well. Thank you.
I would like to comment that embracing new technology is critical. It's very important. We have also, as a company in the country, have been trying to develop new technologies. But I think there's two things that I wanted to mention. One is that oftentimes, as much as we would like to get the best ideal solution, we can't. And we have to go from a bridge type of a technology, something in between or a hybrid. One example is one of the technologies that we have developed is a semi-hybrid fuel cell business that uses natural gas or LPG as a fuel. So it's not 100% fuel cell, but it's a hybrid version of it, which still retains much of the advantages of a fuel cell technology. And secondly is also investing on the software side. We also have a large industrial fuel and power customer base. And what we have encountered is that there's a lot to be done in the energy efficiency and optimization from a usage perspective as well. So we are also developing software in Korea that helps the customers maximize their energy efficiency. So those type of things, apart from the more, I guess, difficult tasks, these tasks are more of easier reach within from an industry perspective.
Thank you. I believe my friends, they contributed a lot. I will just tell, for the energy mix, four points are very important. Number one is availability, then time, then technology, and last is cost. I will argue like this. In Bangladesh, just 10 years back, about 95% electricity were produced from gas, because gas was available that time. And gradually, we find that no more gas, so depending on liquid fuel. That time, 95% was on gas, 2-3% was from liquid fuel, and again 2-3% from the hydro. But now, if you look into the energy mix, huge change. And idea, in the coming years, we want to have a participation of 35% in gas, 35% in coal. At present, participation of coal is again 2-3%. But in terms of time, in 2009, it happened like this, that we need electricity yesterday. So, nothing doing, only liquid fuel was the option. And we have now a huge quantity of electricity from liquid, though it is much costly. On the other hand, gas is as depleting. At the same time, we are importing LNG, keeping in mind that LNG is again costly. Side by side, we are working for the coal. So, time was very important for us. Technology, obviously, we sell out new technologies. Though it is costly, we are doing nuclear power plant. We also love to have the fuel cells and all this. We don't mind for the cost, because in Bangladesh, opportunity cost of electricity is very excellent. You see, 5 years back, there was research. In research, it shows 1 unit of electricity equal to $2. If it is so, why do I mind to spend 20 cent, 30 cent? We did like that. And the last point is, we used to tell cost. Yes, we need to look into the cost, because yesterday also Prime Minister told that our generation cost is about 4.8 taka, that is about 6 or 6.5 cents. This is the selling price, and the production price is about 8-9 cents. So we think that the electricity contributes much more in the economy of our country. So we don't mind putting much more money, getting less return. But in terms of some other job creation and all this, it gives much more dividend. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other view before me, Mohammed? I don't know.
Thank you. In my view, efficiency is the key of the future solution for Bangladesh. We just can't afford to be as Bangladesh was when it was generating its electricity and most of its energy demand from indigenous gas. As I had mentioned in my previous deliberation, that there is a paradigm shift taking place in Bangladesh. We have to, the principal point in today's discussion and in Bangladesh today is sustaining and accelerating growth. We have, under the previous circumstances, been able to move forward, leap forward to 8% growth, as Mr. Azad mentioned, to perhaps 10% growth on a much larger base of $270 billion of GDP. So this sustainability of sustaining the growth and accelerating the growth requires and demands much higher efficiency, both in the generation side as well as the input to the generation, which is again energy mix that we are talking about. And in that, we really must have a new policy of how to import energy. Like the private sector power generation policy, I would like to submit to Mr. Azad, that what would be the policy for import of energy? At this point in time in Bangladesh, there was no thought of importing LNG a couple of years back. Today, of course, the efficient, progressive government of Bangladesh has moved forward and implemented LNG at a pace unseen in the rest of the world. But going forward, we would require a policy dictate on that. Similarly, on the coal, huge amounts of coal would be imported, as Mr. Azad has said, that 35% of the energy mix would be coming from coal. The acquisition of this huge quantity of coal, how to acquire them and bring them, would require substantial thought so that we can maintain the efficiency. Last but not the least, we have not been very efficient in using our energy resources. There were talks earlier that people would rather keep a stove on rather than for a matchstick. This concept must be removed. It is important for senior people like us to get to the people that you cannot misutilize energy anymore. Energy must be utilized most efficiently. Another major aspect that comes is, now that we have expanded our electricity generation to 17,000 megawatts and moving on to 40,000 megawatts, we already have an existing national grid for electricity as well as an existing national grid for gas. Whether we should transmit two energies parallelly and how efficient is that? How much effort should we take and think about it, that where we will supply gas and where we will supply electricity, so that people operate their equipments, machineries, industries on electricity rather than on gas. A parallel transmission of both is perhaps not so efficient. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Azad has mentioned about cost, availability, efficiency and technology. you look at the power sector master plan 2016, it says it all, almost. But while we were implementing, trying to draw a balance between gas, coal or thermal, and of course the renewables, we were seeing, and we are seeing that yes, we started with ADB sponsored Bangladesh energy security options, and now, and we have seen how the thermal part has been replaced by the Asian Development Bank by that of the small LNG based power plant. So the thermal, yes, of course we have heard Mr. Azad that 35% will come from coal, and we were finding it while we were structuring for the Rampal power plant, India-Bangladesh power plant. Then we were finding it very tough unless had there been no Bharat Heavy Electric coming up as the EPC contractor, the financing would have been delayed for considerable number of years. So financing is coming up to be a critical success factor. In the same way, organizing finance for the thermal power plants are becoming very challenging. After that India-Bangladesh Friendship Power Plant, we were approached by another power plant company in Chittagong, 1,320 megawatt. And now we are again working with another international investor for another 1,320 megawatt power plant in the Paira port. And we are finding it so tough to organize financing for those coal-fired power plant. Again, in the coal-fired power plant, supply chain metrics and dynamics is going to play a significant important role. And coming back to renewables, again, we are working with many interested parties in the renewable opportunity space, acquisition of the land unencumbered land document, the technology, as well as the overall guideline available from the government. These are coming out to be serious challenges. Whereas, if you do have a PPA agreement with the government, power purchase agreement, and if you are using a gas turbine, life becomes much more easier. Mr. Aziz Khan can say it more, that either GE or someone like GE is likely to come up not only with the equipment or the EPC, they will also come back with around 20% plus minus equity participation. So that is why when we are talking of course, drawing a balance between gas, thermal and renewables, we should also look at the political and the economic dynamics of the government, of the world, at the same time how Equator Principle or environmental and social risk is going to play its own game. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we covered very well the generation mix. What I would be now really interested in, maybe it's a bit more focused than to Wendy and Mamoon. So what would be the optimal or relevant financing mix in terms of debt, equity, joint ventures, etc., in your view for Bangladesh, given the current situation and the plans?
I will be very brief for the interest of time, as well as I would like to see Mr. Aziz Khan also delve on this subject. But what we are seeing that, as I have mentioned at the outset, that most of this financing is coming from ECA because of the yield curve, because of the technology, because of the country of origin or country of origin for the main sponsor. But what should be the mix? Of course, the mix should come from, yes, equity. There also in the NBR guideline, the concession agreement and the waivers delineated for the power sector financing, power sector investment. That also tells you that, yes, what are the concessions available, what are the waivers available for getting into Bangladesh power opportunity space. But the mix should be, of course, because it is a top-heavy, kind of cost-heavy investment. So we are finding it very tough for the local investors or even the international sponsors to come up with more than 20% of equity or 20-80 debt equity. And there also our local entrepreneurs are finding it very tough to show the equivalent kind of a white money or the available money to finance the equity side of it. But again, what I have mentioned, Ferdinand, that yes, when it is gas-based power plant, it becomes little easier because of the efficiency we get to see in either in GE or Mitsubishi or even Siemens, that yes, the technology platform, the efficiency or management side of it, they have come up with. But we would like to see, of course, local financing. We would like to see ECA financing. We would like to see bilateral financing, and also that lot of foreign currency financing. And I have forgot to mention about one thing. Another critical success factor was in 2000 itself, in the year 2000, while our foreign exchange reserve came down to below $1 billion. Even then, we were working with Summit, United, and some of the El Paso and AES Meghna power plants. And government of Bangladesh did a fantastic job. That is why we were given investors were given a kind of a natural hedge against their payment from the government exchequer. So government did provide from its own foreign exchange reserve kind of a natural hedge so that the power payments is not being hampered. So coming to the end of it, of course, mix should be on the debt equity side, could be max 30-70 or 20-80 preferably to encourage the local investors. And second side of it, that natural hedge against the foreign exchange payment in and out. Third could be that yes, debt from, of course, ECA and multilateral, bilateral, and international foreign commercial banks also. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick view only, please.
Fernand. Okay, I'll be pretty quick. So first I want to kind of address one of the elephants in the room. So of course IFC is a financer. We're very fortunate to have both the resources and the strategy to be focusing on Bangladesh. When we're looking at financing, what do we look for? One of the things is that since we are part of the World Bank Group and we're focused on the climate impacts of what we're doing, we would be only focusing on basically gas fuel generation in power space and in renewables. So that part is very important for us, and we look for projects and partners that are going to meet our performance standards. So it's similar to many international lenders. Equator Principles, IFC's performance standards were actually the beginning of the Equator Principles. So understanding those principles on environmental and social standards is very important. We look for experienced partners. We look for the both domestic and international developers that have the track record in business and their understanding of what they're doing and the integrity in the way that they go about their business and they're structuring their projects. And we're also looking at issues with regard to corporate governance but most important probably for us as a development institution, but it's completely aligned with how Bangladesh is developing its power and energy space, is that we need to see the development impact of what we're doing, that it will be delivering power at a competitive price, or it will be delivering gas to areas that need it and industries that need it. But the need and demand is so great here, it's very easy to make development a development case. But finally, of course, we do look at the financial viability of the project and whether or not the debt and equity structure, the risk rewards, the various technology risks, depending on the structure, are properly put in place. So, there is quite a few, there's investors like IFC, but as I mentioned, we are looking constantly to bring in other investors, both development financial institutions that have a strong appetite to fund and finance private projects in Bangladesh, but also other private financial institutions, particularly those focused on Asia. We see a strong uptick in interest to look at financing in Bangladesh. But if it's the first time they've financed in Bangladesh, it's very rare that they would do that by themselves. So that's where IFC focuses a lot on mobilizing other financiers into our projects. But I think beyond just the basic kind of and debt equity, and we do both debt and equity on projects, we do need to see more diversification of financing sources. We need to look at, for instance, the bond market in Bangladesh, and also at offshore bonds should be a source going forward, both if the government would be looking to do sovereign bonds, for instance, sovereign green bonds would be an area that could really open up further resources. resources and expand the investor base who might be comfortable coming into Bangladesh. So I think expanding the kind of financing structures that are available here will also be part of the mix going forward to ensure that long-term financing is here for critical projects.
Thank you, Wendy. I would have a last question to Mr. Azud, and I would open for a few questions from the audience, and then at the end again ask Mr. Chairman to give a summary of his perspective, partly based on this discussion as well. So my last question for you, I mean, the state-owned utilities of Bangladesh didn't participate significantly yet in the financeability of the sector, yes? What would need to change, in your view, in order for them to be able to raise debt and also contribute with the financing to the growth?
Just I want to intervene in one point that one of the multilateral bank, international multilateral bank, they showed their interest to finance in coal-based power plant. My request will be to the financial institutions. Some of the institutions, they used to do refinancing only in Bangladesh. They don't want to share the risk. Once in an international forum with the multilateral banks and international banks in Hong Kong, I asked one of the top guy, what is the risk in investing in Bangladesh? You used to put a premium for risk premium. So the top guy, he depends on his colleague. So his colleague answered in a very clear voice, I specifically request how much money did you lose in investing countries like Bangladesh for political risk? His answer was no. But again, the multilateral banks, they used to put a premium on political risk. So this should be looked into. We are a developing country. Why you charge me extra? So I requested, okay, at the beginning you put political risk, you take premium, but at the end, please give me back that money as you did not face any political risk. So try this. So we need to look into, for the developing countries, you need to come up with innovative ideas. The common phenomena, the rules, regulations for whole the globe should not be equal. Thank you.
Mohammed, you had a quick reaction only, and then please we can go back to the question.
Yeah, I also think I'll put a little bit of my thought on the previous question. We have been very lucky to get into this huge development phase on the back of almost zero interest rate. In 2009 and 10, the interest rates were almost zero. So there has also been a sea change that has happened in the financial markets around the world. The interest rates are now increasing, and today the LIBOR is 2.5, 2.55 for 6 months, which was zero when we first went into the Bibiana 350 megawatt power plant. This is something that we must keep in our mind. Summit itself has, and there was an additional thing. The governments of the whole world were giving a stimulus. The new concept of a stimulus had come out, which had provided extraordinary liquidity into the international market, getting every investor or every lender to desire to come and invest in a slightly, in your opinion, riskless, but in the opinion of the lenders, risk-prone countries, that how to make some monies. That shift is taking place where interest rate is increasing and stimulus is decreasing and there is no stimulus. It is in that context that we have to move forward for the next 10 years. I personally feel that Summit would be taking on this challenge, recognizing them and moving. Therefore, we have recently concluded with Mitsubishi Corporation a partnership where they have invested 25% of equity in the LNG space of ours. And we believe that countries like Japan, where JICA and JBIC sort of support is necessary, for our Meghnaghat 2 project, which is a 580 megawatt power plant, where IFC is supporting us, we are taking SERV, the Swiss SERV guarantee, which is really bringing down the cost of funds to an extraordinarily low that we have not seen in the past. So these new methods of financing in the coming context of next 10 years, where there is likely to be a higher interest rate regime and there is likely to be less liquidity available. Thank you.
Thank you. Role of the state utilities, please.
Pardon?
So my last question was, where do you see the role of the state utilities in the financeability of the sector? In the past, their contribution was limited because of the financing ability. What would need to change in order for them to also contribute by raising more debt?
About the utilities in our country, financing in generation much more easier in terms of transmission and distribution. In our country, we started unbundling the power sector about 2 decades back. From then, or before that, only Bangladesh Power Development Board, they generated electricity, transmission and distribution, all these works were done by them. So now a good number of organization has come up, that is in terms of transmission and distribution. If you look into the efficiency of power, system loss, some of our distribution company, now they are doing single-digit system loss. Again, 2 decades back, it was 40% system loss. So efficiency has grown up tremendously in different way by putting the system loss with technology, with distribution in prepayment meter, all this. So the financing issues for the distribution and transmission, for distribution it is much more easy in one term, and again for the transmission, only selling and buying from the generator and to the selling to the distributor. My idea that as power sector is moving together with energy, the fuel mix, the fund mix, in terms of the multilateral development banks, international financial institutions, joint ventures, public-private partnership, and very successful in Bangladesh, the IPP. Now the private sector contributes 50%. So with all these, I think lastly the sovereign fund of $2 billion, it is going to be set up this year. So all these will give much more comfort, but we would request the multilateral banks and the financial institutions to come up with their innovative ideas of financing so that the private sector gets much more, much more encouragement for investment in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking at the organizers. Do we have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience, or should we wrap up? Okay, so we can open for a few questions, maybe 1 or 2 if there is any interest from the audience before we conclude the discussion for today, or this morning at least.
Hello, my name is Zillur Rahman. I was trained to be an engineer, now entering into energy sector as a sponsor for some solar mini-grid projects. My question is there any incentive in terms of tax benefit or investment of previously undisclosed fund as rehab and other industry sectors are asking for the energy sector investment from Bangladeshi individuals or business enterprises? Thank you.
Not sure if anyone can pick up this question. If you not, then maybe we pass this on. I don't know if we can answer.
I think if you take all the questions, then
Okay,
it is
good.
possible for me answer or anyone.
Okay, so please then we collect the questions if there is anything else, and then we will split the answers.
Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. I am engineer Jakaria Jalal. I am working for Bosundhara LP Gas as a general manager, strategic planning and expansion. So I glad to see the very bright panel. So we have been learned a lot of things from you. So one thing I want to ask basically Ajas sir, as because he works directly with the government. So as far as the funding concerned that we are seeing, we are been investing a lot on power, lot of LNGs, coals and other things. But as we know, we are in delta-based plan in Bangladesh. So we had a lot of opportunities of gas explorations and other things. So what is the government concern regarding these things to invest, as because we are being blocked by the IOCs, companies and others. So why not government strengthen the BAPEX and other things so that we can explore more gases from our own source and we can utilize this for our power and energy sector. Thank you very much.
Let me answer. At the same time, the panel can contribute also. About the undisclosed funds, I believe we should not encourage undisclosed funds for investment in power and energy sector. Basically, undisclosed fund for no sector. But about the Bangladeshi expatriate individual funds, most welcome. You may know, very recently we have opened one window. And this window will become a door and big gateway for the expatriate investors. We started with 3 areas, that is their expert support, their benevolent works, and also putting some investment. A special cell has been formed in our finance ministry, ERD. We always encourage the expatriate investment. And also, government is working to have the expatriate bond, expatriate power bond, that may help in having much more fund for the development of the power and energy sector. About the gas exploration, IOC, you know, Chevron will bear me out. It is very difficult for getting new IOCs introducing in Bangladesh because of the world market of gas. A big number of gas companies, they are withdrawing their money. But fortunately in Bangladesh, Chevron has coming in a bigger way. Earlier they thought to withdraw, but I believe they saw the opportunities in Bangladesh and they are coming in a bigger way in Bangladesh. We are trying to strengthen BAPEX. You know, in the last 10 years, BAPEX, capacity of BAPEX has been triple or quadruple. We are working with some of the IOC, some global gas and oil companies, so that BAPEX can work in a joint venture in different program, in different project, then gradually in programs, and regular partner for capacity building of BAPEX and exploration in offshore and onshore. We are working on the new area which we got by legal battle with Myanmar and India. The seismic service, the multi-dimensional service, these will start very soon. So The participation of IOC, I am not very encouraged, but capacity building of BAPEX, that is we are trying to do in a huge way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for addressing the questions from the audience. With this one, our time
Hello, good morning.
run out.
Good morning.
Sorry, apologies. Unfortunately, our time ran out, so we would like to close the discussion. We happy to answer maybe some of the questions offline. I would like to thank very much the esteemed panelists. Obviously, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And also, thank you very much for the audience for attention. Thank you. Have a nice rest of the day.
I would like to request MD Abdul Kalam Azad to give our keynote speaker, panel members, and moderator a token of appreciation. First, I would like to request Mr. Richard Razik to come forward and accept the token. I would like to request Mr. Richard Razik to come forward and take the token. Now I would like to request Mr. Ferdinand Varga, the moderator of our session, to come forward and take the token. Now I would like to request Ms. Wendy Werner to come forward and take the token of appreciation. Now I would like to request Mr. Kim Young-bum to come forward and take the token. Now I would like to request Mr. Girish Gilly to come forward and take the token. Now I would like to request Mr. Mamun Rashid to come forward and take the token. Now I would like to request Mr. Neil Menzies to come forward and take the token of appreciation. And now I would like to request Mr. Muhammad Aziz Khan to come forward and take the appreciation token. I would like to request Mr. Ferdinand Varga, our moderator of the session, to give a token of appreciation to Mr. Abdul Kalam Azad.